This Week in Startups is brought to you by Casper. Get $50 toward any mattress purchase, including free shipping and returns by visiting casper.com/twist and using promo code TWIST. And Blue Apron. Check out this week's menu and get your first 3 meals free with free shipping by going to blueapron.com/twist.
Hey everybody, good morning, good morning. Welcome to day 2. Did everyone have a great time yesterday? Let me hear it if you had a good time. So, thanks for coming. We are super, super lucky to have our next panel. We always talk here at the Launch Festival about how lucky we are as investors to be able to go on journeys with entrepreneurs and, try to put a dent in the universe. And the next 3 investors I've known for a long time. We have a number of co-investments, I think, in almost all cases. And they take the work seriously. And as I've gone on my journey, I've spent a lot of time on the other side of the table as an entrepreneur and constantly seeing bad behavior and nonsense from investors who break the number 1 rule, which is never get high on your own supply. Just because you write the check doesn't mean you're the important person in the equation. In fact, the check is not the important part of the equation. It's the people who get up every day and do the hard work to make these companies successful. And that kind of humility and work ethic and dedication, I think, is what Hunter, Megan, and Jalak are all about. So please welcome my first 3 guests today at the Launch Festival. Hunter.
Hard work.
This is what we do?
This is what we do. It's a little fist bump. I'm trying, I'm getting over a cold.
Me too.
And when you're at an event like this and you're the MC, everybody comes up and says, I just want to shake your hand. And I say, actually, you don't. It's a petri dish.
Hard work. I thought, where's the barista and pastry baskets? This isn't like a normal venture morning.
It isn't. It isn't. Well, you heard my little prelude, Hunter, about the work. You spent a lot of time building companies, famously at YouTube. What have you learned about being on the other side of the table? And have you felt yourself ever, tip over into that sort of, hey, I'm the important person in the equation? And how do you look at yourself in the equation as being an investor now versus a builder?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the way that I think about it is there's only really one thing under our control, and that's if we're fortunate enough to have the opportunity to invest, whether we decide or not to do that. Once we've made an investment, we're certainly not the most important person in the room. We invest at seed stage, which means there's really no way for us to create value unless the founders are building a company they're going to be proud of. And I think the operating experience, which I know Megan has as well, for me, it's more about sort of the evergreen empathy for the journey of building rather than it is feeling like that I have some playbook that they should be running. I'm not the quarterback coming back 10 years after graduation, telling them about the pass I threw in 2007, and this is how we did it at YouTube. But I think what does get retained is sort of the empathy and understanding for how difficult it is to build something and how to take that energy and use it over many, many years, not just when things are exciting or new or fresh.
Megan, talk about that issue of sort of changing sides of the tables and what you've learned as a venture capitalist and investor.
Sure. I mean, it can definitely be tempting, especially if you miss operating, which I do every day. I think if you've been a part of great teams, when you cross over to the investing side, you still always really have a lot of empathy and miss that at times. But yes, it can be tempting to want to get more involved than you should as an investor. And my rule of thumb is what I can do is give you templates for things that I have seen, decision points that other companies have had to go through, whether I was there or not, and the end result of those. And set that up as an opportunity for you to learn from other experiences as an entrepreneur, but never on a dictating basis. And whether that can be things like how do you structure a recruiting process to scale from 20 engineers to 50 engineers over the course of 6 months to very tactical things like what does a good product roadmap look like?
Jalak, how do you think about it? What's the optimal role of an investor, especially one who's maybe done operating before?
Well, I think it's, I always say it's a combination of psychologist and coach and funder, and there are many roles we play at different times. But what I never lose sight of is it's the entrepreneur that's building the company day to day, and that's why I do a lot of diligence up front to make sure that we have some understanding of where we see the business going, right? Because what I've seen in the past is sometimes investors coming in and then, putting their viewpoint of where this company should go, where, the entrepreneur doesn't want to do that or never did want to do that, and that's where you have problems later on. So I view it very much as an enabler. I'm always available. I have 25 companies in each portfolio. I don't have, 400 or 500. It's very much about choosing the entrepreneurs that I feel like I can partner with and making myself available and making my network available for them.
We've seen a massive proliferation of starting of companies. We all know why. The cost has dramatically gone down. The tool sets are out there to get a product to market and get some early feedback quickly. How do you all manage your deal flow? Because it is getting to the point of almost absurdity, the number of companies, and in fact, the number of people pursuing the same opportunity, or people pursuing a subset, and I see it in my own portfolio now. I'll invest in 6 companies that have nothing to do with each other. Mm-hmm. They all pivot, and now I've got 3 direct competitors in the same portfolio, and have to have a sit down with everybody and say, I am not sending your monthly updates to each other, and I know that it's a little bit bitter now, but you guys decided to pivot, not me. So how do you deal with that, Megan?
Well, I would leave it to the seed folks to start first, because I benefit as being a growth stage investor. Yeah. While we do look at a very broad landscape of companies, we look at everything from pre-revenue Series B to pre-IPO. And we look across enterprise and consumer, and frankly, even a little bit of life sciences. So that's a lot of companies. But we have the benefit, frankly, of investors like you and my 2 colleagues here, who have helped companies get off the ground through different funding rounds. What we really look for in our conversations around deal flow and what meetings do we take and where do we spend time is something that we call inflection points. So we talk about being inflection investors. We want to be able to point to a metric. It could be number of users, it could be engagement of users, it could be revenue, it can be a lot of different things, but we want to be able to point to a metric without squinting too hard and be able to see that the trajectory of the company has changed. And so we will actually ask often entrepreneurs up front before even meeting, can you help us understand what the inflection point has been for the company in the last 6 months, 12 months, so that we can see if it's a good fit for where we invest at this point.
If they don't have an inflection point, does that mean don't need to take a meeting right now? Or, hey, we'll take a meeting, but understand that we're probably not investing right now.
That's what we do. We set expectations, and we think it's actually a good thing to continue to have that conversation, take a meeting. The last thing we want to do as growth stage investors, especially when there's so much capital in the market, is to come to a process that's underway, and there's a lot of people looking and a lot of money being thrown around. So we will still take the meeting and have the conversation because we want to develop a relationship. Frankly, we want to earn the right to be a part of a later funding round and show that we can add value in advance. But we do also want the entrepreneur to have expectations that, hey, this might be a little bit early for us vis-a-vis our mandate as investors.
How do you respond when they say, if you give us the money, we'll give you an inflection point?
I turn them over to my venture partners on the venture fund.
Hey everybody, I want to tell you about my favorite mattress, Casper. Yes, that's right. I sleep on a Casper and I love it. They are revolutionizing the mattress industry by getting rid of resellers and retail. None of us like to go to those stores. None of us have the time. None of us wants to deal with annoying sales people at those stores. And Casper takes all that money that other people are spending and they pass along that savings to us, the consumers. And they have obsessively engineered this. It's at a shockingly fair price. And it just combines that beautiful memory foam with award-winning sleep surfaces. Just the right sink and just the right bounce. Breathable design keeps you cool throughout the night. And that's very important for me because if it's not the right cooling, I start sweating and I hate it. But my Casper mattress is just right. There are 20,000 reviews over at Casper, Amazon, and Google reviews, and they average 4.8 stars. You can go check that out right now. They're quickly becoming the internet's favorite mattress. Free shipping, free returns in the US and Canada. It's designed, developed, and assembled here in the United States of America, and I love it. I use the mattress, I sleep on it, and I can't say enough good things about it. My wife loves it too. So try Casper for 100 nights. It's risk-free in your own home. If you don't love it, they'll just pick it up and return you everything. They refund everything. Just return it, boom, you're done. And you can get $50 towards any mattress purchase. Here's your call to action. Go to casper.com/twist and use the promo code TWIST to save $50. Casper.com/twist, promo code TWIST. All right, let's get back to this amazing episode. Okay, Hunter, how do you deal with the deluge that we're both experiencing, we're all experiencing, which is fantastic that so many people want to start, but it has created a bit of a manic environment out there, hasn't it?
Well, we have a perfect algorithm.
Oh.
That just scores everything.
Oh. Can you email that?
Sasha is actually a bot.
You have the crystal ball.
No, it's actually, I would say it's the complete opposite of that, which is we're no FOMO investors, right? So we're not worried about chasing everything and missing one thing. We have a fund size and fund strategy that allows us to ultimately be judged by the deals we did, not the deals we didn't do. And so what we try to make use of is an understanding of if we're making 8 or so investments a year and we're playing a lead role in a seed round, what are the types of founders, the types of situations that are going to be good fits for us? Can we use a founder's time very quickly to understand and assess? Like most of my first meetings or phone calls are sort of half an hour. People will say, is half an hour enough time to know whether you want to invest? I said, no, but it's enough time to know that we're not a good fit for each other. And if there is mutual interest, we almost certainly then figure out how to accelerate the process. And we also look at categories that maybe for a period of time aren't right for us, even if the venture community has enthusiasm for it. So for example, the past few years, we've decided that we aren't going to be investing in VR, especially consumer VR.
Why is that?
Look, we have to be early or contrarian with a concentrated strategy. And we felt like that the conditions over sort of 2015, 2016, 2017 in that space didn't allow us to be early or contrarian in a meaningful way. There was a lot of enthusiasm that was leading to quick fundings, overfundings. There were a lot of startups that whose ability to go to market was going to be subject to technology that they didn't own or control, and the deployment.
In other words, the number of headsets out there.
Headsets, things like that, adoption. And it was unclear where the value of the adoption of that first wave was going to accrue to the OS owners, the hardware manufacturers. Was it going to look more like a content model where studios are benefiting, but there's not necessarily scalable? So you have the early
startups. Part of your concept. You could be early, I guess, but contrarian, no. Everybody knows this is going to be something.
Right.
It's kind of muddy.
So we rather go look at something else and spend the time where we say, hey, if we're not going to do VR for a little while, that's fine, because there's areas in agriculture and autonomous robotics that we're really interested in. And if I was the consumer or internet guy at a $1 billion fund, saying no to VR would be a lot gutsier call than being at a sub-$100 million seed fund where 20, 25 investments per fund, we're going to get a few right, and those are going to be very meaningful.
Last follow-up to that VR, which I think is everybody's kind of noodling. When do you think we'll have 10 million people in the United States put a VR headset on in the same day? Not the number of units sold, but 10 million headsets go on for a day and people use them for something. I'm going to let you guys answer too, but I want you to give me your year and quarter.
Let's see, what's the day after the 2020 election? I might need to escape into VR.
So if we get 4 more years, you're saying everybody jumps in and that's it, we're done?
Yeah.
We're going to live in an alternate reality.
There's a non-market.
I think we are living in the alternate reality right now. I'm definitely subscribing to multiple universe theory, given what's happening this year.
So my pre-Google experience was I cut my teeth on Second Life, right? Sort of online streaming virtual environment. And I saw the challenges of building some of these immersive experiences, the uptake rate on technology that was required to use them, and also the sort of challenges with creating these virtual spaces where everybody has a different notion of what's the perfect use case for that space. So I think for a number of reasons, probably a little bit
give us a quarter, give us a year.
Okay, so I have a 5-year-old. She will absolutely have VR as part of her late middle school, high school curriculum. So 10 million concurrent users.
So
let's
she's
say
in kindergarten.
5 to 8 years.
5 to 8 years. Okay. So I'll give you 6 plus 2017, 23. So say Q4.
As long as we're not talking about like a static, like stereoscopic, look, I can turn. I'm like real immersive.
Yeah, putting on a headset, AR, VR. When do you think that's going to happen, Megan? If you had to pick a quarter in a year, we got 2023, Christmas 2023. When do you think 10 million?
I'm going to take the long side of that. I'll say
take the over. Okay.
Yeah, take the over. Sorry, you're.
Thank goodness that means we're going to be around.
Give us a year. Okay.
I'm going to say 2025.
Okay.
And for the sort of sake of discussion, I actually think it'll not be sort of traditional consumer or gaming experience. I think it'll be some combination of enterprise, whether that's white collar, blue collar, manifestations of VR. But I think that that's where you go to work and your employer is the one who's buying it for you, and they're the ones that mandate that you wear it, and you're doing checklisting or you're doing meetings or whatnot.
So but I think a pilot is going through the checklist manifesto.
Sure, or like oil rigs. This is already starting to happen a little bit.
The enterprise AR stuff is really good.
Or even just meetings. I mean, frankly, I was talking about this last week. It took me 2 hours to go from San Francisco to Palo Alto last week for one meeting. Forget it. I'm never doing that again. Like, I'll put on a VR headset all day and take that meeting.
Jalak, when do you think?
I'm going to go a little bit longer. Yeah, I think 2020. So I'm going to do the 10-year time frame there. And I agree with Megan. I think it's going to be enterprise. I mean, if you look at just even in education and medical schools and, places where, maybe if they don't want cadavers, have to have all these bodies to cut up, and you can use VR in those situations. So I think like to put on a headset and interact with it, and maybe I'm just being like a New Yorker and not an early adopter Valley person, but like I think it's going to take a lot factor for the average consumer to want to do that.
All right, she lives in a city that's interesting past 10 o'clock at night, so her adoption rate might be a little bit different than us here in San Francisco.
In fairness to San Francisco, when people put Google Glass on and harassed people in bars, San Francisco rightfully started fights over it. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to walk into a bar with Google Glass at 1 a.m. and start telling people you're videotaping them. I'm going to take 2020. I think Apple and Snap are going to put out glasses before like little AR glasses, and they might be light, but I think it's going to qualify for the bet. And
but now you've switched the parameters. You just said AR. The question was
okay.
VR.
Well, I was including AR in it.
See, I like AR. I'll invest in AR.
Hey everybody, I want to tell you about a great product which you've probably heard about, but maybe you haven't tried yet, and I have tried it and I love it. It has become a big hit in my household with my 7-year-old daughter. It's called BlueApron.com. My wife loves it too. Go to BlueApron.com/twist and you'll get your first 3 meals free with free shipping. It is an incredible experience. You get a box. It's obviously refrigerated, and all the ingredients and a beautiful menu card and a recipe card of how to make the product. So I've always wanted to make pizza at home. I've never done it. I mean, I made English muffin pizzas, so we call Irish pizza when you're growing up in Brooklyn. But they sent a beautiful pizza dough and beautiful sauce and cheese and everything, all perfectly portion sized and an easy to follow recipe. Then the other thing I've always wanted to learn how to cook is General Tso's chicken. That was one of my favorites when I was in New York and I was living on the West Side in Hell's Kitchen. I'd walk home from the Garden after watching the Knicks win a playoff game. I get General Tso's chicken. I never knew how to make it. They give you all the ingredients, a little cornstarch, so all these little syrups, and you like a little professional chef. Everything just goes smoothly. It is an incredible experience. It's also affordable. You get a ton of variety. It's super flexible. You get the deliveries when you want. And it really, I was just amazed by the quality of the bok choy, of the chicken. Everything was the highest quality. And it saves you not only from going to the supermarket, not only from getting a recipe, but also the portion sizes and how to put this all together. It makes cooking delightful again, and they are in partnership with 150 local U.S. farms, fisheries, ranchers. And they, so I'm a big seafood fan, and we love going to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And when I went there last time, they had this beautiful card that told you which fishes you should order, which are sustainable. But it's very hard to actually get that certified. People lie when they sell you fish. You don't know what you're getting. You don't know if it's actually sustainable or not. And even some of the stuff that's farm raised is actually not good for the environment. Well, you know what? Blue Apron takes all that away. They do all of that important work for your family. And it's very important to our family that we order sustainable stuff and we don't take stuff from the ocean that's not sustainable. It's a big movement amongst considered people. So the fact that they use the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch list to me and their standards is very impressive. Prep is, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. It's super, we did it faster in some cases, but we're fast cooks. It tastes great. It's easy. It's a better way to cook. It is a better way to cook. And also delicious. I made this beautiful Sicilian pizza and my daughter ate it all. It was one of those great experiences where she was looking in the oven, counting the minutes. So blueapron.com/twist, blueapron.com/twist, TWIST, and you'll get your first 3 meals free with free shipping. It is amazing. All right, let's get back to this amazing program.
Let's talk a little bit about the impact that syndicates have had on the early stage, the proliferation of angels, and now equity crowdfunding. You might not be aware, but for, I think, the first time in history at this event, for sure, we did a simulation 4 years ago where we let the audience pretend to invest. This year, with Seed Invest, we have 17 of the companies on stage. You can actually invest in them as a non-accredited investor. So they're doing 17 different funding rounds. So you can put a very small amount of money in. How do you think that's going to impact the world, if at all? This equity crowdfunding where your consumers, if you were Twitter, Spark's big investment was Twitter, the early users of Twitter, early advertisers of Twitter could have been allowed to invest, or in YouTube or Second Life, the first 10,000 YouTubers could have, instead of taking their $1,000 monthly check, had 10 shares a month of YouTube.
I'm personally very supportive of it. I think it's a great, interesting trend, mostly because I think that we've created this myth that venture capital is the right funding vehicle for all sorts of companies that want to get going. And I think that that's totally incorrect. And I think if you can do small amounts of capital through distributed equity vehicles like crowdfunding and what sounds like you're doing here today, you can do small business loans, you can do all these things, but traditional venture capital with traditional ownership requirements and traditional exit requirements is not actually the right funding structure for the majority of companies. And so this opens up another avenue of capital for people to get started that don't necessarily fit into the model that venture capital requires.
If you see a party round, coming out of a 500 startups or YC and an AngelList syndicate on a late stage deal or a venture deal coming in, does it make you cringe and go, oh, we have cleanup work to do on the cap table, or is it just sort of de rigueur now?
No, I wouldn't. It doesn't make me cringe. I do want to know beyond who has invested dollars, who's invested their time. When I talk to the entrepreneur, who out of that syndicate, who out of that group really has spent time, has been meaningful, has been impactful, is an advisor. And if they can't point to anybody, that's a little concerning, because then it means they've basically skipped a round of development, I think, as a company, not necessarily as a business, where they haven't necessarily had that kind of advice or mentorship that I think can be really instrumental, particularly in the early stages of company formation. So
they've bifurcated the advice and money sort of tradition that we have here in the Valley. How do you look at it, Jalak? Are you supportive of these things? Are you concerned?
Well, I mean, it's both. I think that not every company needs to go for venture funding, and then the idea of getting users on board, and I'm studying this as part of like blockchain and the ICOs, the crowd
ICO.
Sales. So it's crowd sales of tokens, like we've heard of Ethereum and Bitcoin, and there are like now hundreds of tokens out there, and basically create tokens for different purposes and open it up to the general market to be able to buy those tokens to then have ownership in these companies and use cases. And we're in the very early stages there, but I think that's like a next generation of what we're seeing on these crowdfunding sites. So I think there is a place for them. I think there is a danger if there is a company that wants to grow to $1 billion+ or whatever it is, and they're not having the right guidance to do that. And that's to Megan's point of, who's getting engaged, who's mentoring, who's helping these companies. Because I do think there's a role that venture VCs play, good VCs play, in helping the company's evolution and kind of turbocharging what they would be able to do.
Hunter, how do you feel about the sort of early stage, group financings, party rounds, whatever?
I think globally, early stage entrepreneurism is probably underfunded by at least one order of magnitude, maybe two. When you think about technology being a driver of innovation, company creation, job growth, and globally moving from industrial capitalism to technology-driven capitalism. What I, sort of echoing, I think what Megan was saying, I'm interested in some of these alternatives, not as chasing the maybe I could have gotten, $1,000 into the seed round of Facebook, but more there's a lot of businesses, more businesses that are going to be created and create value that probably shouldn't take venture money or take venture money and at some point should get off that curve. And it's really hard to look for, it's really hard to find all the right vehicles that have both sort of willing to take the risk, willing to take the early bets, but fall in between a bank loan and venture. So I love new opportunities there. I think we're going to see some interesting experimentation with how to get companies off of the venture curve that maybe have a chance to be sustainable ongoing businesses, throw off dividends, so on and so forth, but won't necessarily graduate to, for example, like the growth capital stage that Megan serves. And I think that there's a lot of different types of capital, including crowd-funded equity that could play a role there because you're going to get better yield than potentially off of other places you could put your money.
So, and being able to provide liquidity, I think that's been the big gating factor, and we're now seeing different models that will allow liquidity.
I'm somewhat fascinated by
markets.
You have some let's take a Techstars, which has been around for a number of years. I don't know hundreds of companies.
Yeah,
right. So there's probably there's obviously ones that have done very well, and there's ones that sort of weren't able to sort of clear the hurdle that they wanted. But there's probably a really thick middle, right?
Yep.
And a lot of those are sort of going to be profitable ongoing businesses. Could you take that middle and securitize that middle? And do something interesting with
a basket.
Yeah.
A roll-up.
Yeah. I mean, and could that go public? Could that, find an exit strategy for some of the employees, some of the founders to take some risk off the table, some liquidity for their options and not have to just think, hey, it's either I'm going to have that inflection point or, I'm a zombie, I'm Walking Dead.
It is kind of an issue because if you get to $1 to $5 million in revenue and you grow 50% a year, it's an absolute disaster for a venture capitalist to put money into that business. Although any of us with a business with $3 or $4 million a year in revenue that was growing 50% a year would be like, oh my God, in X number of years, this is going to be like $10 million.
Yeah.
But that would be death for a venture capitalist.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of wonderful businesses that are going to be worth $20 to $50 million of enterprise value and owned, 50% or more by the founders and team that shouldn't be considered failures.
And then we could offer that up to the customers who are helping create the value and then can participate.
Well, that was my question. Let me give you a real world situation here. I love your company, The Skim, millions of emails now. And if they came to you and said, hey, we want to offer, on Seed Invest for our, 10,000 of our 5 million emailers to put in $1,000 each, and that's how we're going to do our next round of funding. And there'll be no board seat, and it's just, this non-voting class. How would you react to that?
I mean, I guess the question is always use of capital and why. Financing is a strategy, it's not a milestone, right?
Okay, so let's say
if you're saying,
you were planning on raising 10 million anyway. They say, we want to raise the 10 million this way, not with the venture firm. It's going to be the same dilution. Everything's apples to apples. The only difference is no board member comes on. The non-voting, so the governance stays
I think stuff like that could be really interesting. They did their B round with strategics because they thought that they were already looking for a different type of value than just capital and didn't need another venture investor around the table at a B. They needed Fox and the New York Times to to provide sort of some ecosystem advice, support, and resources as they expand from the newsletter, the app, into video and other types of content.
This is a different manifestation of what you're talking about, but you'll recall with the Square IPO, Square actually set up a vehicle so that Square sellers could buy into the IPO. Obviously, much, much later, but there have been some.
eBay did it one time, I think. They gave some sellers, who knows, a car company with drivers could do, or an hotel without hotels, like Airbnb could do that, right? Give all the hosts that.
I guess I'm most interested in those types of things as business strategies rather than financing strategies, right? So in Square's case, about the relationship they have with the sellers, about goodwill, about being consistent with the brand, about getting your best customers to even be more committed to the company because they feel like equity owners. Those types of things, to me, as a venture investor, feel more interesting and strategic than just like, hey, is there a lower cost of capital that we can get from a new type of investor coming to the table? Like for me, that's a financial engineering question, and I'm most interested in what's going to help this business be stronger and more durable based upon involving its customers.
And what do you think of the content business now? We've seen BuzzFeed, Vox, a couple of companies start to become worth serious valuations, $1 billion, $500 million, et cetera, getting valued at 3 to 7 times their top line revenue. Are these good businesses? Are these venture businesses? Or is this a mistake for venture capitalists to get into the content business?
I get very nervous around content businesses.
Why?
Particularly at the growth stage. So I think you can make money as an investor in content businesses, but I think, and this is universally true, but maybe even more specifically around content, the price you get in at really matters because there is, in my view, kind of an inherent ceiling.
What is that ceiling?
I knew you were going to ask because that's a good follow-up question. I thought Business Insider looked pretty good.
HuffPo, same number.
I just think it's really, 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 really difficult to build huge businesses in the category, and that's sort of proven to be the case. That being said, again, I think that you can make money on the content side. You just have to be an earlier stage investor, and you have to focus on that price. Where I think the next sort of generation of new media content that's interesting is around podcasting. I'm sort of outspoken that I'm a very frequent podcast listener. I probably listen to 3 or 4 hours a day. And
give us your top 3 podcasts right now after Finding Richard Simmons, which doesn't exist anymore. I know that's number 1.
And any that you're on?
Thank you. I'm the nuclear option. If your podcast is going down in the ratings, just like, get Calacanis on here and press the button. We don't like to do it. Is that what you're saying
about Kafka?
What's that?
Kafka was going down in the ratings?
Well, no, I just think if you want to get that ratings boost, you want to go up, it's just like, we don't want to have him on, but we kind of need the ratings. Okay, push the button. It's a reluctant button push.
Anyway, the category's early, but I think it's interesting. It's one that I track. So,
who are your top 3?
Oh man, you came back. I thought you were off.
No. I mean, I'm the master of the follow-up.
If you listen to 3 or 4 hours of podcasting a day, as I do.
Bill Simmons?
No. That's my husband. That's my husband. No, I actually try not to listen to tech-related podcasts. Oh. So I really like How I Built This, which is a great podcast around people building interesting businesses in different ways that are not typically venture capital.
Spanx was the best episode.
I like almost all the Gimlet stuff. I actually personally don't like Startup because it's a little too
precious
on the nose, perhaps.
It's very precious.
And I mean, there's a lot of great content being made out there. I love the Pod Save America guys.
What podcast you listen to? Is that like the new looking at somebody's bookshelf and to judge
Oh my
them
God,
by
yeah,
what
totally.
they
I
read?
take out my Audible and then my podcasting app, and I just go, dueling banjos back and forth.
I judge you by your recently used emoji and your podcasts. That's how I figure out if we're going to be friends or not.
What's your number 1 recently used emoji? Because mine's crying, laughing.
Is it the two sides of the same coin? Is that 2 sides of the same coin for you?
Well, it's anybody who's a troll is going to be using that pretty. Like Gabe Rivera doesn't put it on, but I just put it on just to sort of put it on every time.
I think my wife is currently in Dublin, so I think it's my most recently used one was probably sort of the Irish flag or something.
Oh, very nice.
Isn't that nice?
Nobody's really made this podcasting into a huge business.
Yep.
I wrote a little blog post about it last week. I wonder.
Inspired by my tweet.
What's that?
Inspired by my tweet.
I couldn't hear because you put it on.
Inspired by my tweet.
What was your tweet?
Remember, you responded to me about we were talking roll-ups, and then you had the nice thing.
Yeah, it might have been actually. Maybe subconsciously. I remember the tweet now.
Maybe.
Well, I did a podcast network myself
Timestamp.
7 years ago. So
Put it on the blockchain.
I had it on my mind. But
Hey, I worked on a late night talk show when we were kids.
There hasn't been great analytics around it. There haven't been really great ad platforms built around it. Some of that's inherently, frankly, as a result of Apple's ownership or dominance in the market. They just don't pass through much in the way of analytics to podcasters.
But you're late stage.
Yes.
Let me pitch you. And
Now here we have
hold on. I'm going to pitch you. I want you to pretend this is an actual real pitch. And I want you to tell me just candidly yes or no. I have 7 podcasters already signed up. They, in aggregate, have $25 million a year in revenue in 2017 projected and 18 last year. And I want to raise $100 million.
No.
300 million posts. And then get the next 50.
No.
Okay, no. All right, let me try again. I've got 25 million
The
rolled
inflection
up.
point can't be how much money you want to raise. That's actually the only metric.
Anyway, I want to get
I need a different CEO.
I'm not saying I'm the CEO. That's a fair point. I think it's a no. Anyway, somebody comes to you with a qualified CEO and $25 million in revenue, 7 of them, and they want to wrap it up and then get the next $25 million and people on board to have $50 million and then eventually work towards an IPO. What do you think of this idea? Candidly.
As I mentioned at the outset, I think content, in content particularly, including podcasting, price really matters.
Okay.
And where's the revenue coming from?
It's advertising and subscription, 80% advertising, 20% subscription, off the top of my head. What do you think, Jalak? Walk me through this.
Not my space.
Not your space. Okay, so you think entry price?
But advertising. I mean, I think we need new forms of advertising for some of these, new platforms. And
Hunter, what do you think, broad strokes, about the idea?
Yes.
You're in.
Well, I think I struggle to find a venture investment that I want to make in, let's call it the non-music audio space, but I'm a tremendous believer in it. I've spent my career prior to Homebrew, so Second Life, AdSense, and YouTube. I get really excited about technology as a creative tool, the communities and conversations that form around that, and then I believe that dollars do follow and stay, and these markets tend to be dark until something lights it up. So until people finally understood how much money YouTube creators were making, that all of a sudden people get excited. And AdSense, we got to see oh my goodness, there's a tremendous amount of money going to the medium long tail. It's not just the CNNs of the world. Yeah. And so, we don't know in aggregate really what the size of the podcast market is now, but it's large and growing. And I think without a doubt, if you look at it as, non-music audio that can be accessed through mobile devices, through your car, through your home, the ABCs, ESPNs of the world, the traditional media companies are going to need their non-music audio plays. And so I do believe there's some large bet to be made. It just doesn't start with $1.5 million seed round to build an app.
But you're an investor in Anchor, right? That's an interesting
We have
company.
a few smaller investments in and around because we're believers in something is going to be done here, and we want to be one of the investors that
all right, let me, I want to just make an apology to the audience. We tried to get more male VCs involved in the conference this year, but we had a hard time finding them. And we've got more female investors this year.
You couldn't find the 96% of decision makers.
My Emmy Award-winning producer, Jackie. Exactly. My Emmy Award-winning producer, Jackie, figured out somehow how to have more female investors on stage this year than male, despite the 96-4 ratio. So we found them, and they came, so that was great. I was wondering, to the two of you, how do you think we're doing as an industry? Because, the Alan Pow trial kind of woke everything up, hey, there's a massive problem here. Has it gotten better? How does it feel to you?
Well, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm please mansplain, please.
Yes. I'm going to invite Hunter. I'm going to invite Hunter to join me in listening. How does it feel to each of you on a personal basis today? You've both been in it for a while, the industry. How does it feel today to you, Megan? Is it getting better? Are you still concerned? How do you feel about it generally?
I think statistically it's not getting better. And I don't think we're doing a good job of bringing more women into the decision-making roles in venture capital. And frankly, I think if we were really serious about it, we could have had more progress at this point. Because I think when you get a lot of smart people focused on a specific cause, you can make change happen pretty quickly. I struggle with, so I was thinking about this recently. I was making a bet with someone that I don't think in 5 years, the top 10 venture capital firms in the US will all have at least one general partner. And that's a pretty astounding thing to be able to say, wow, in the next 5 years, these firms that at least say that they care about diversity and bringing women into the partnership will not be able to meet that goal. Even giving 5 years to find a woman, you know? And, but I really don't. Like, someone wanted me to take the other side of that, and I was like, I can't. I just don't think it's gonna happen, because I don't think people are actually really focused on it. I think they talk about it a lot. And yet I still meet tons and tons and tons of young guy associates and young guy principals, and those are roles that could be filled by equally, if not more so, accomplished women. And we know that women go up through the ranks in venture capital. And so, yeah, it's really frustrating.
Jalak, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, so I've been in the industry since 1999. And so I've seen some progress since 1999. I mean, we have more VCs out there. So if you just follow, you know, even if the percentage stays the same, we're seeing more women. I do see a lot of junior women, especially in New York in the industry. I mean, but what I've seen over the years is a tremendous amount of drop off to get to partner. It's a hard industry to get to partner. What I want to see is also more women starting funds, and creating different types of cultures and inclusiveness and a different point of view. When I've talked to all-male partnerships that have taken on a female partner, they talk about how the conversations around deals just change with a different perspective. I mean, it's the most obvious thing to bring in if you want to have a differentiator and an edge to bring in diversity. But yeah, I mean, the latest numbers just show that there's been really not a lot of movement at the senior levels.
All right, on that sobering note, I'll thank Jalak, Megan, and Hunter. Big round of applause.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. So we have our second consecutive Twitter alum here, Rishi Garg, and he was the VP of Corp Dev at Twitter, ran some pretty high-profile acquisitions there, and now he is a general partner at Mayfield Ventures. So give it up for Rishi.
Hey, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay now? Yeah. All right. It's just before lunch. Always a good time to go. So, as he said, my name is Rishi. It's great to be here today. I love this launch festival. I'm going to talk to you today about something that's sort of near and dear to my heart, not Josh Ullman's Twitter account, but proactive M&A strategies. M&A means mergers and acquisitions, or selling your company. Going through the process of actually harvesting all the value that you as founders are here to create. And more importantly, how to actually do this and stay sane while doing it. And obviously what's implied by that is that a lot of founders don't stay sane while doing that. And hopefully today, I'll be able to talk about some stuff that'll help you as you get into this phase of your companies. So today, I'm an investor at Mayfield. We're an early stage venture capital firm. But in my prior life, I ran corporate development and strategy teams at 3 public companies. Most recently, Twitter, where I was VP of Corp Dev, as well as Square and MTV Networks. And along the way, I also started and sold a venture-backed company, and I worked for a couple other venture firms as well. And so this is sort of a topic that really I care about a lot and that I've seen from a bunch of different angles. The reason is that over the course of my career, I've noticed how sort of flummoxing this experience can be for founders. And it's interesting that it is, because if you think about it, almost all of the ways that folks will actually harness the value that they've created is going to come from mergers and acquisitions. Like, we're all sort of trying to build companies and back companies that are going to be big, resonant, publicly traded businesses. But when you actually look at the data, this data is very stable over time. The vast majority of venture-backed exits come because a larger company or another company buys your company. And so the question is, well, given that that's the case, shouldn't everyone be really good at this if you're in the founding position? And the answer is no. I've heard so many different things about what goes on for founders and what kind of mixed experiences they have when they actually try to sell their company. Everything from their advisors weren't as helpful as they wanted them to be, to they wasted too much time not talking to the right people, they didn't get the price they wanted. And you'd be surprised how often it is, especially in the enterprise, if you have an enterprise business, that you find out that your competitors have been acquired and you're kind of the last one standing at the dance without a partner. These are one of the many things that people care about whenever or are sort of faced with as they go through the M&A process. And so what I want to do today is give you a little bit of a sense of how to understand the M&A process. How do you sort of be proactive? How do you think ahead to it? And also, how do you in the end get the right help? Because that's one of the key questions that come up during the M&A process. So most people will say, listen, let's start at the deal. What does a deal look like? And maybe sometimes you'll hear people talk about the approach. How do you get buyers at the table? How do you get involved with potential acquirers? But I like to start all the way at the very beginning with the pipeline. Because what happens with most founders is you don't really think about selling your company or getting involved in an M&A process or planning for it until you're all the way at the approach stage. You're already talking to potential acquirers, maybe you're trying to get people to the table. I would argue that you should start thinking about this at a certain phase, very similarly to how you think about other activities that you do. And you actually think about developing a pipeline. So one of the biggest questions, there's two basically big questions that come out of it. The first one is, when do I start thinking about this? If I'm going to start thinking about this as an early stage company. And the second is how. So when it comes to when, and this is one of the biggest sort of hard things to get your head around as an entrepreneur, you don't want to start too early thinking about M&A for your company. Usually you're building your business, building your team, getting product market fit, trying to grow your business and grow your product, and usually developing an ecosystem around your business. If you're very early stage, say in the seed stage of investing or your Series A, that should be your primary focus. But once you start to develop an ecosystem, once you have partners, once you have real customers, once you're starting to get some kind of flow into your sales process, probably once you're raising around a Series B, for most companies in that sort of segment, it's time to start thinking about how you might be proactive in working through your M&A process. And the reason to be proactive is actually because there's almost no overnight successes when it comes to M&A. There's sort of this myth that the way that companies get acquired is they're repped by a banker maybe, or one founder meets another CEO, and the next thing you know, they do a deal. But the truth is the vast majority of M&A deals, and the vast majority of the deals that I've done in these various roles, come about because of at least a year-long relationship with a founder, right? So you think about some of the best M&A deals ever, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, or Apple and Beats, or 3 or 4 of the deals I did, Telepart, Periscope, et cetera. Every single one of these transactions happened because there was a CEO relationship with the founder that was developed over the course of time. So that when that moment came where it made sense for these two companies to come together, for them to do more together than they could apart, the opportunity was already there, the trust was already there, and they could actually execute that transaction quickly. How do you do this? So we talked about the when. Now let's talk about the how. Because one of the biggest problems in this process is you're building your company. You've got a million things going on between team building, customer getting, ecosystem development, what have you, fundraising. This is just one more thing for your plate. So one of the key things is to figure out how to unobtrusively and crisply organize your efforts once you're in that Series B-ish sort of stage so that you're able to position yourself for these long-term relationships that'll allow you to potentially have an exit if you want one down the road. And I like to use something called an M&A prep sheet. And here's how it works. You basically get together with your management team. You spend 2 or 3 hours on it, usually, very rarely more than that. And you sort of brainstorm together who are the most likely acquirers of this business based on the ecosystem I'm developing, based on our competitive dynamics, based on who else is in our space. And you try to articulate sort of a 1-line or 2-sentence rationale for why that acquirer might be the best one. Once you've done that, you can sort of start to stack rank them. Which ones seem like the best? And generally this process results in sort of 5 or 10 ideas. No more than that. From there, you start to map out a couple of other key things. One, who's your sponsor? Every deal that happens at a big company or any kind of growth stage technology company generally has 2 kind of key components. One is the sponsor, the person who's going to own the deal after the transaction's done. They're the ones who are putting their kind of reputation on the line to say, we should buy this business. The second one is your corp dev leader. That's the person who's going to sort of help shepherd or organize or drive your process through and make sure everything's done. So one good idea, just like you do with your fundraising process or with finding great customers, is you start to brainstorm who in your network do you know? Who in the network do your board members know, or your advisors, or even yourself? Where you can get to people who might either be a sponsor at these companies you've now sort of highlighted or identified, and who might be the heads of corp dev. And then you slowly, no more than 1 or 2 meetings a month, you sort of spend time, just a little bit of time, like an hour a month, meeting and systematically developing those relationships, okay? Those companies are organized to want to understand the ecosystems. They want to understand who is building new products and technologies in their spaces. And the corp dev teams explicitly are there to develop external relationships so that ultimately, if it makes sense to join forces, that opportunity will be there. But then the question becomes, okay, great. You've gotten together with your team. You've figured out your M&A prep sheet. Maybe you discuss it once a quarter with your board just to make sure everyone's on the same page. It takes 5 minutes with your board, usually not more of a discussion. But now what do? You're actually in the meeting. So what I tell people to do is if you do 1 or 2 of these a month, the goal is for founders to make it as sort of low stakes as possible. And here's how. You focus on things like basically stuff you already talked about. How do you communicate your vision? How do you talk about what's going on in your industry? And how do you build a relationship with a person across the table? Those are your goals. And also your big goal is to learn. Your goal is to use this opportunity to get as much information as you can about what the potential acquirers' strategic interests are, strategies are, et cetera. Right? It's very, very common for your corp dev potential acquirer pipeline to dovetail very closely with your biz dev potential pipeline. So usually there's an opportunity to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone because you're thinking ahead about who might be potential acquirers down the road. In fact, most of the deals I did started out as biz dev deals or as discussions around biz dev deals. What you don't want to do in these meetings is you're not trying to sell your company. You're trying to build a relationship. The purpose of these is to build a relationship, not to actually end one or consummate one. You don't want to disclose too much without asking questions. You actually want to be able to kind of gain information and share it carefully, but still share enough about what's public about your company so you don't feel like you're being too circumspect. And then finally, you don't want to ignore the competitive landscape. And this is one that gets a lot of people tripped up because there's a tendency in these meetings or any kind of meetings to talk about yourself sort of from a boilerplate perspective. What you want to try to do, and the way that an acquirer is thinking about your business, because they're meeting with several companies in your space potentially, is they want to understand what's different. So one of the big opportunities and challenges of these meetings is articulating as crisply as possible how do you differentiate yourself in a competitive field. Right? And if you do this well, you'll be able to hone both a great answer to that question, and it'll help you sort of use that and refine that as you talk to more and more people, whether they're potential hires or potential investors or even potential acquirers. So great, now you've got the sort of pipeline process working. What about the approach? Right? You're in the market, you're doing a bunch of stuff, you've developed your M&A pipeline, you're meeting with potential acquirers, and then some of them say, hey, listen, we should actually talk about joining forces together. So now you've got this question of do I go forward in the process? And this is an important question because the M&A process is not lightweight. It involves many meetings, it involves a lot of effort, it involves all kinds of things that you want to be very careful about going into unless you're really ready to sell. And one of the key reasons that entrepreneurs kind of don't like the M&A process is because they find themselves in one and then realize sort of halfway through that they don't really want to sell the company yet for whatever reason. So how do you think about that? Well, one question to ask yourself is your business at an inflection point? What does that mean? Let's say you've raised a Series A and a Series B and you're thinking about raising your Series C. A lot of times entrepreneurs will sort of realize that they could either raise $20, $30 million, whatever it is, and go forward, but then they'll have to sign up for building that business and take on the risk of doing so for another several years, or they can actually capture a lot of the value right now on a risk-adjusted basis by selling the company today. So if your business is in one of those inflection points, then it may make sense to think about moving forward. If you have done a great job so far with selling, but you feel like your business may be tapping out unless you do something pretty different, that may be an inflection point that helps. Another thing to think about is your competitive landscape. So sometimes, and this happens all the time in businesses, it happens all the time in venture capital as well, a certain kind of product will suddenly get really sort of validated in the market. And several acquirers, several competitors in the space will start to want to have their play in that category of products. right? If that's starting to happen, if you're sniffing that validation, if you see your competitors starting to get acquired, and you think you're around the same sort of competitive power that they have, it may make sense to think about selling. Because this is going to be a time when you're going to have more bidders at the table, people will be really open to your product and the value it provides, and you'll be seen as innovative. And that'll allow you to consummate a transaction maybe more easier than it would otherwise. Or maybe your competitive landscape's getting really hairy, and there's a bunch of people out there. If that's the case, and that's going to put pressure on your business, maybe it's time to sell. The key thing is, as you're thinking about this, if you decide to sell, once you do this internal analysis, great, move forward. But if you don't, politely decline as early as you can in the process, continue the relationship, and then keep on going and building your business. Because, like I said before, one of the things that can really kind of drag you down is getting involved in an M&A process you'd rather not be in. Once you're in this process and you are starting to meet with acquirers, how do you know if they're interested? How do you know they're not just like fishing? There's a few signals that you can find that'll sort of help tell you this. If they are really interested, they'll be moving pretty quickly. You'll be having escalating meetings, not just like the same meeting with the same person, but several meetings higher and higher up the food chain. They'll give you clarity on the process. You'll be able to say something like, and I encourage every founder to say this, what is the steps to actually getting a deal done? And they'll be able to tell you it's this, then this, then this. Versus if there's not real process clarity, you may be in trouble. And you'll be able to both articulate what you can do together that you can't do apart. How do you fit together in terms of your strategy and their strategy so that it makes sense to actually join forces and not be separate companies? Conversely, they may not be interested if things are moving a little bit slowly. They don't seem like they know exactly what the process is going to be. You feel like you're having the same meeting over and over again without actually making any progress, or they can't tell you precisely why you should decide to join forces with them, because maybe they're not clear on their own strategy. If that's happening, again, politely decline and continue to build your business to the best of your ability, or seek other acquirers, because these are usually yellow flags that the acquirer's not really ready to step forward. So great, you got your pipeline done, and now you've been approached. How do we actually think about the deal? The deal process can be like really long and has a lot of like little components to it. But I'm going to talk about a couple of things that I hear most commonly from founders and have experienced most commonly in the roles I've been in that I think would be helpful as you think about this stage of your company. First of all, terms. What are the most important terms that we think about? Well, so there's some that are pretty obvious, and they're usually sort of in the legal bucket, if you will. How much are you paying? How much of your consideration is getting revested because the company, the acquirer, wants you to stick around and they want some incentive for you to be there? Or is there an earnout? And they're going to add something to the consideration so that you're actually going to, as you hit certain milestones post-acquisition, you'll get more paid out. But there's also a question of acceleration. What happens if you, in that revesting or that earnout, don't end up getting the resources that you need or being able to accomplish your goals? A lot of times, those are the most important terms because, let's say you're let go because there's like a political battle. Do you accelerate all this consideration that you've worked so hard to get? So these are some of the key legal terms that come up in the course of an M&A transaction. But then there's also the execution terms. And these are the ones that a lot of times entrepreneurs don't think about as much because they don't realize that when an acquirer buys a company, you're actually not just buying a product or technology or a business. On almost every case in growth stage or established technology companies, you're buying leadership. You're buying an ongoing concern. You're buying some sort of ongoing enterprise that you want to maintain over the course of time. And therefore, you actually care about strategic vision, a strategic alignment of your vision. You care about what resources you're going to get to actually build your business. You care about the executive who's sponsoring you actually being someone who's going to probably stick around. And watch out for companies where there may be a revolving door of executives, because maybe that's not the place where you're going to have the person who put their neck on the line to get you acquired actually being there later on to make sure you get what you need to be successful. And what is the organizational model? Who do you report to? Who does the rest of your team report to? It's amazing how infrequently founders tend to focus on this and how frequently the ball is dropped by acquirers on managing this effectively. So it's great to get clarity on this as early as possible. One thing I always tell founders as well is understand how valuation works. That means that you probably have some rudimentary idea or some basic idea. Sometimes you have a very sophisticated idea as a founder about like, what does valuation look like? But understand specifically how public companies or larger companies in your sector think about their own valuation. How do investors value them? What do their metrics look like? What matters to them? And think about how that then applies to your own business. And how might that result in your own valuation? Now, your banker's going to help you do that potentially, or you have a lot of advisors who can help you with that process. But to the extent that you have a good intrinsic idea of how that works, the more likely you are to talk to the right kind of acquirers and also know if you're getting lowballed from the very beginning or if it's a good offer. Secondly, get the right help. get the right advisors. It's very, very common for people to sort of not think about this until later on, but I actually advocate as early as possible for getting experienced M&A counsel earlier in your process than later. So if you wait until you're already in the M&A process and then you meet for the first time your external counsel's M&A lawyer, you're going to have to develop sort of a new relationship from scratch during a pretty intense moment. So if you have external counsel, and a lot of firms do, go ahead and get to meet their M&A counsel today. Develop a relationship. They're going to help advise you when you're in that approach stage, sometimes even in the pipeline stage, so you're making the right decisions. And they're critical when you're actually going through a deal. So it sounds like one of those things that is sort of a throwaway, but having the wrong M&A counsel or someone who's not super experienced during the process is a death knell to many M&A deals. Another question we get a lot is, should you get a banker? Right? And that's a very good question. And bankers are actually good for some things and not good for others. So what bankers are really great at is stuff like valuation, helping you think through that, getting multiple bidders at the table, helping you negotiate price, right? Helping understand what market deal terms are, understanding the ecosystem and the environment that you're swimming in, and managing the early process, making sure you're getting all the ducks in a row so you can actually move the thing forward and get deep into the process to get the deal done. Now, what they're not good at doing is helping you way back in the pipeline stage, developing that CEO relationship that you need when you're actually trying to do the M&A prep sheet. Now, they can help with intros, but the work of developing the relationship with the potential acquirers has to be done by the CEO. They're okay at strategy and product, but really, you're going to understand that so much better than any sort of third party. So that's for you to own as a CEO or as a founder. And finally, integration or post-merger planning, which matters a lot to the founder, because for the founder, it's how they go to work every day and how they accomplish their long-term goals. But generally isn't something that your advisors are going to have a lot of insight into. And then the final thing I'll note is, Corp Dev is your friend. So there's a famous Paul Graham article that's called "Don't Talk to Corp Dev." Corp Dev are the guys who do the M&A deals at the acquiring companies. And to a large degree, this is actually very good advice. Because if you don't have product market fit yet, if you're building your very first prototype, if you're getting your first customers, if you're in the middle of pivoting, if you haven't raised more than a Series A, the chances of you being ready to sort of think ahead to M&A is pretty low. So I would say for those kinds of companies, or for those stages of companies, yes, keep your head down, continue to build product and add value. But once you are a little bit later on, and you are starting to think about who might the potential long-term acquirers be, it's great to have a relationship with Corp Dev. And the reason is, one, they can help you understand the acquirer strategy. So it can be a great source of understanding. That's good for competition. It's good for BD. They can introduce you internally. There's a lot of really great sort of strategic reasons for Corp Dev to help you. They can advocate for you and introduce you to the right product people who can become sponsors. And finally, they can help you navigate the org chart. Who has power? Who has the ability to get a deal? How do deals get done? Who do you have to talk to actually be able to be successful? So with that, I'll take some questions, but I wish all of you very good luck as you build companies, and hopefully you sell them all for lots of money. And you can reach me on Twitter at @RishiGarg. Thanks. Questions? Yes.
Time for a couple of questions.
Sure. Yeah.
So Rishi, great presentation. So there are companies that are like small companies. You want them to have a competitive advantage, but even a Dropbox, for example, Microsoft could have come in and done exactly the same thing, right? So there is no real competitive mode. Even Google, the link algorithm really worked well. So at that stage, how do you go about kind of like building these M&A relationships, and can you kind of address the trust factor a little bit? Because all of us have address books and a network of 1,500 people. Who do you trust? Who do you not? Can you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's common sense, but would love.
Totally. Yeah. So I think the question is for everyone is, when you think about highly competitive environments, Dropbox, Google, for example, Yahoo, Google, how do you as a founder of a growth stage company or an early stage company, think about trust with these potential competitors. Because even while Microsoft or Google might be a great acquirer for someone like a Dropbox, should they really be having like M&A conversations early? And how do you manage that trust? And this is one of the most important things. So it kind of depends on the nature of your business and what you know about it. Very early on at Dropbox, once they achieved a little bit of that viral adoption and that viral loop, they were really off to the races. Because the stuff that Josh talked about was so sort of resonant. Like there was really, really great organic growth. And usually companies like that will not start thinking about, especially if it's on the consumer side, will not start thinking about how do I build an M&A prep sheet and start to think about potential acquiring relationships. Usually you are thinking about business development. And the way that, even though sometimes some of those companies do get acquired, witness WhatsApp, Instagram, et cetera, the way that those conversations start is really through business development. And so it's easier for a company to kind of pivot to thinking about what, if any, external relationships exist for a consumer company from a biz dev standpoint, if there are any, to focus on those, because the disclosures are very easy. It's like, I'm not going to say too much about my strategy here. You can kind of see it. This is the product. For enterprise companies, it's a little bit different. Also, the other thing about consumer companies is when you're a consumer company and you're successful, everybody knows it. Everyone knows the business, right? It's all kind of out there because your consumers are using it. So the strategies become pretty obvious. For enterprise companies, there's often a lot that's hidden underneath the surface that isn't that clear. And so in those cases, it actually makes sense to start to have some of these discussions because you want your potential acquirers maybe to know a little bit about what's going on. But again, going back to how you handle those meetings, you're going to be talking mostly about the stuff that's kind of public. Your vision, what's on the website, what you're talking about at conferences and stuff like that, right? So you're not actually disclosing too much. And you do want to be circumspect about that. Over time, though, a little bit of that relationship building does allow you to have an opportunity either for a biz dev deal or eventually for an M&A transaction. Thank you. Anybody else? Yep.
Is the core biz dev person an internal resource or an external architect?
You're the core biz dev person at a startup?
Yeah.
Most of the time it's internal. I've definitely worked with sort of biz dev folks for hire with startups. The problem is, like any sort of core part of a startup, everyone's got to be kind of all in, really deeply understand the business. In order to just, when you do a biz dev deal, I ran biz dev a bunch of years as well. Like, it's all about your internal relationships with the company because that's how you actually consummate the transaction. I get a biz dev deal done. I've got to make sure my product team can execute it. I got to make sure my engineering team can build it. I got to make sure my CEO is totally on board with it. So usually your biz dev hire needs to be internal if it's a core part of how you're building your business. The exception to that would be if you want to try it out. You think biz dev partnerships might be a way to grow, but it's not necessarily, you're not necessarily sure. So you can try external help to see if there's something there. And then if there is, you can bring that person or someone else internal so they can actually execute on that long term. Good question. Yes?
Where do you stand on having an exit strategy in place on day one versus waiting until you're at the Series A?
Great question. So the question is, what do you think about having an exit strategy in place on day one versus thinking about it later on? There's an old adage in our business that great companies are bought, never sold. So which basically means that if you start a company thinking that you're going to sell it, that's not really kind of what happens. What happens is you start a company, you try to get product market fit, you try to actually do something amazing for users or customers. And if they grok it and they like it, you'll have growth and you'll be valuable to somebody. And generally speaking, I think that makes sense. Part of the reason that makes sense is, let's say you start a business in a really interesting space that has a lot of big players. Well, you might think, okay, well, that's great. There's a lot of great acquirers, sure. But it's also just as valuable for you to start a business in a space that doesn't have any real competitors or large folks in it, because those are the white spaces that often create really unusually great outcomes. So it's good to have some sense of your market. But it's much more important to focus on, are you building real enterprise value? Are you building real value than what your nature of exit is going to be for most companies?
All right, let's give it up for Rishi Garg.
Thank you, guys.